Hello, and welcome back to episode 58 of This is the Year. Joao again with me today. We're heading into the 60s of our episodes here at the Swiss AI Engineering Podcast. Great to have you back on the show, Joao. I think we have a bit of a heat wave in Europe. You're just back from Germany, now in Lisbon. I was already in Lisbon and flying back to Switzerland very soon. It's a bit under pressure here. Not only the AI markets and the stocks are crashing, also some ACs probably in the Northern European countries. How are you doing, Joao? Maybe just for you in the audience, before we go to you quickly. Today we're talking about tagging Claude into your Slack channel and potentially maybe in the future even Microsoft Teams. So essentially having this digital employee working for you and with you. That's one of the conundrums we are going to discuss today. And also then, secondly, we tried to open a bit of a black box on this return of AI discussion. Fable 5 was blocked for some reason, and there's some rumors around that the winner is only one country, and that is China, and certainly not Europe, and definitely not the United States. And then we switch it off today with some topics around loop engineering and MCPs, building without having the goal in mind. Joao, great to have you back from Germany. How was the
Good
heat
to be
wave?
back. Not fun. I mean, the hotels have AC, and that's good, but most streets don't. And even if you try to go near the river and cool off, I had some ice cream. I had to race to eat it, given how hot it was outside. It just kept melting. I felt like a kid all over again for the worst possible reasons. But other than that, I think Portugal's having like some kind of like weather depression, and that means we can have slightly cooler weather. We have rain for some reason. That makes it a little bit more stable to be in, just outside of the heat wave that's wrecking the rest of Europe.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, just for you guys in the audience, I mean, we're usually jumping between different countries. Sean, myself, so Switzerland, Germany, and or Portugal. And yeah, funny enough, Switzerland and Germany, they had like this 35, 37 degree heat wave. And in Portugal, where I was most of the time, now there was like 22. It's like completely off. So yeah, truly excited to have you back on the show. Sure, let's dig right into the first topic, Claude Tag. Here's the rundown just for you guys in the audience in case you missed this new development. And according to the reporting internally at Anthropic, that's anyway how 60% of their people have been interacting with Claude. What it is, it's essentially not interacting with Claude's code over the UI or over a terminal and within Claude's Cowork. It's exactly just tagging at Claude within your Slack channel. And then essentially Anthropic Claude models would be actually spun off and execute the task you would ask it to do. I think this is this idea of, again, digital identity, digital employees. A few of the benefits, of course, maybe just to name a few, and then we try to segue into that topic with you, Joao, is essentially it's one coherent context for the entire enterprise. And that's kind of, I think, a unique element because instead of having individual employees with individual chats, with probably individual results, this is a coherent way to orchestrate different workloads with one context management and also with one memory essentially. So that's a bit a coherent place where you have this all-knowing digital employee versus you have a split of, let's call it 272 Claude instances separately living in each and every single kind of, chat window of the employees. And then the second component is it learns over time, meaning, of course, across the entire org. This is a bit this AI nativeness. I think Y Combinator was also displacing. And then, of course, it takes initiative and it's in ambient mode and it works asynchronously, which means you can essentially just delegate stuff and it will pick it up when it sees it fit to be executed. Joe, what's your take on Claude Tag? Is that something that we see in Europe more in Microsoft Teams, or where do you see that is heading?
I see it as a brilliant marketing move, and in this strategy of instead of waiting around for employees to develop and just download Claude into their computers, it is a good program to have around, but most people sometimes take a bit too long to do it. You just kind of inject it already into the workspace. If companies are using Slack, that's just, I think, a number one place to put it. However, here in the EU, I think that Microsoft has a little bit of a monopoly over companies in general. So most companies are using Teams. So why isn't Claude on Teams yet? I think Microsoft has a pretty tight grip on the ecosystem. They have their own offering, which is Copilot and Copilot agents and Copilot everything, they have a pretty bad naming scheme, but it be conflicting having Claude integrating directly. They like to offer Claude as a model, but inside their own Copilot agents and Teams agents, not just have an external provider directly into Teams. So I think Anthropic would like to have direct integration with Teams. I think Microsoft might not let them until they have a pretty solid commercial agreement that benefits them, because otherwise they'll just be cannibalizing their own offering for agents. And as far as I know, companies took a while, but they're now picking up this idea of agents and integrating agents into their workflows. And Microsoft wants to be the number one provider for that. It's like kind of their architecture of being number one in everything, or in everything being Microsoft. So they have their cloud, they have their teams, they have their agents. Hopefully, in your entire company will be Microsoft and not Claude.
But you see this as like kind of a new form factor or a shift in a form factor, meaning there's a lot less SaaS needed now. So every single software as a service is running over a chat window, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's like, there's probably not that many actual SaaS that you would need if you can just add Claude pretty much for everything you would need. Like, you have an organizational intelligence question. You don't need a UI for this. You just add Claude on a chatbot. Maybe you want to get some intel on a particular client for a sales team. You don't need a Salesforce. You probably don't need a CRM, maybe, like holistically all the time. Maybe you want to look something up from the history, but then again, you just add Claude and ask a question that you would then in the old world go check in the UI. I'm kind of really thinking, like, if this is the new form factor, if it's truly everything conversational AI, meaning this kind of chat interaction, and you just, instead of look something up in a UI, which means you need to know where to look on it. We last time talked about SAP, we talked about Salesforce, we talked about HubSpot and all these players, and you just ask, well, the digital employee that anyway knows everything, so why would I then go open my 7 or 8 SaaS software if I can just ask a question? Do you think that's a new form factor, Joao, that we in the future maybe have a limited SaaS UI interface, not 7 or 8 or 10 softwares, but only the chat?
I think we're certainly going down that path. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be a long-lasting one. Because yes, theoretically you can have, if you want to check something on your sales report, you can ask Claude about it. You want to check something from your marketing team, you can ask Claude about it. However, it's not as efficient probably as having dedicated software for it. And eventually that will start to cost you. You have this kind of apps that are sometimes very low maintenance and very low cost to just host. Like checking an Excel, sure, will cost you maybe 30 seconds to open the Excel and go to the right sheet and see the numbers on the table. You can ask Claude about it, but instead of costing you 3 clicks, it'll cost you around $3 to $4 in tokens, and it'll cost you a lot more if you keep doing it throughout the day. And if you're not just one, but 100 or 200 or 1,000 employees doing it all at the same time, Pick will certainly push that idea, and they will try to make it as easily as possible and as appealing as possible to use Claude for everything. But it's just, I think in the long term might not be as profitable for companies. And we are seeing slowly but surely a kind of a rug pull, not only the control on what models are available, but also the API costs, because we have seen an increase, but they're still subsidized. There's no doubts about it. People running the numbers and checking how much does it cost to run these kinds of models and what they're selling them for. They need to make more money out of them. So they're still subsidizing. They're going into IPO. They'll need to be profitable. And so we'll be seeing a rug pull, I think, until December. And we're going to see this huge spike in prices, which will make companies ask, yes, we can do this with Claude, but should we? Or is there a more efficient way to go about it?
Yeah, I think it really, I mean, I'm a bit twofold and split on this. I mean, on the one hand, like on my Claude setup, like I use something called artifacts. For you in the audience, these are essentially living tiny SaaSes within Claude. So I have one for sales, for example, or one for research, or one for GTM, or one for software engineering. Like, these are like my tiny SaaSes, like software as a services, that I don't pay to nobody. I just pay my 20x Anthropic license, and I will then feed these particular living artifacts with JSONs or with other bit data points that I either manually upload, or it has some sort of an interaction within my computer, and it actually updates itself in that case. And I can ask questions, which in the world of Salesforce, in the world of SAP, you then have a separate chatbot. But again, everything is now living within Claude, within the ecosystem. And you're completely right. It's probably not the cheapest query if you ask a question in a living artifact. But if the living artifact is clickable like a SaaS, you don't even pay a token compute or other than to actually update the database. So that's kind of why, yes, it's probably more expensive if the query is already running over the chat. But if the living artifact is the software itself, and it can actually be fairly complex, you have a clickable UI of this living artifact, and the only compute you pay is to update the artifact. So that's a little bit where, yeah, I kind of get your point. There is probably more costs coming from the token intensive retrieval, but since the artifact is itself livable with clicks and the UI, I don't see that to be spiking maybe the API costs. But that's a bit to be seen. I just don't know if the form factor is now all in chat. Probably not, but certainly for some subcomponents it might be, and it will kill a lot of the internal chatbots of some SaaSs that just are ramping stuff on top. But you mentioned one really good point, which is essentially the rising of AI prices on the one hand, and on the other hand, the sovereignty and kind of the block out of frontier intelligence. For you in the audience, you've probably also witnessed this Fable rug pull that we've all been hearing about. The context now, I think, is a little bit shifting. The US government was essentially giving them a chance, take it off, because AWS was essentially telling the US government they actually executed jailbreak. Darius said no, and then they kept it on, and then there was this ledger essentially on this export control. Now Fable is offline, and this raises this question on sovereignty on the one hand, but also in regard to the price spikes. It again accelerates the case, aside from the sovereignty, to go to China anyway, because the models are much cheaper. What's your take, Joao? I think you and I, we were debating today also in our offline chat, aside from the podcast, how much ahead are these Chinese, or how much behind are these Chinese open source models from these Fable-like models? And due to this whole of blocking thing on Fable, are they now catching up? And we will for the first time see a frontier model on number one that's open source and not closed source this year.
It is an interesting topic, and especially because initially they had like 1 year gap. So you had whatever frontier model we had on OpenAI or Anthropic, let's say it was GPT-4. It took a whole year until open source could catch up and have an equally liked model that performed equally well in benchmarks. Benchmarks have become increasingly dubious. The training data is out there. The labs, both from Anthropic and the Chinese models, are trying to optimize their models to perform well in these benchmarks. However, the gap that was initially 1 year became 6 months, 4 months. I think we're close to 2 or 3 months between the latest frontier model and the best open source model. So I think the US got so inspired by EU or regulation that by restricting Fable 5, they committed the same mistake that the EU did, which means they gave China just a leg ahead and gave them the opportunity to surpass the West, basically, in this terms of model capabilities. Because if companies cannot launch their models and cannot test them and cannot iterate on them, then it just gives them very clear disadvantage over these labs that are not only providing the models within China, providing the models globally. And more people were initially afraid of these Chinese models. What does it mean? What about inference and compliance and basically ownership of data? Money speaks louder. And having an equally capable model that performs sometimes comparably well with 5 times less the cost, that means you're at least curious to try it. And I've seen it in multiple companies that initially had this agreement with Microsoft that was good enough. They were thinking about having an agreement with Anthropic because they had the best models. And now they're heavily looking into inference providers that gave them the capability of these outside open source models, because you can host them in the EU, you can have sovereignty over data, and you can run them for much cheaper than Anthropic. So, all in all, I'll give them maybe until December, early 2027, for Chinese models to be at the top of the leaderboards, not only on the benchmarks, but also gaining more and more the favor of the people using them. And so I don't think they'll reach number one usage over Claude or over GPT that fast, but they will certainly eat a very big share of the market.
I mean, it's probably exactly true. I mean, we've been mentioning this probably for the whole year. And since we're running this show, it's episode 58. I think we've mentioned this the first time in episode like 6 or 7 last year, that this gap between open and closed source is shrinking. And what it really means, if you're a builder and or if you're an enterprise, right? So you have now the understanding Fable 5 came out in June 2026. And this is closed source. It has a particular price tag. And if you can infer now by looking ahead into the future, 3 to 6 months from now, there is an open source model as capable as Fable at a fraction of the cost potentially, and you have 100% control over it. So the question is, are you now building on Fable, meaning you pay all these hefty Anthropic API costs, maybe you're locking it down even on this vendor, or you give it a 6-ish month product backlog wait time, and then you jump on a GLM, or you jump on a DeepSeek, or you jump on some other open source Chinese model, which has more or less the on-par intelligence, and you have 100% sovereignty, and it's much cheaper. The whole reason why we even bring this whole topic of costs up, because there was I would say, a bit of a famous report on the UBS group, the Swiss bank, which essentially says that, 60% of all the companies that are using somewhat artificial intelligence, they've really are starting to actually curb down in terms of, okay, which employees are actually eligible for the frontier intelligence? What are they using it for? And they're trying to have some model routing within the organizations to, of course, optimize return on artificial intelligence, ROAI, because it's money. So you don't want to spend $35,000 per month essentially on one employee, and this employee uses it for no good reason, and she or he uses Opus 4.8 on max mode for like cooking some sort of, lunch recipe. So you want to make sure that they're using 4.8 max only if it's really necessary, and if it's particularly for code, you don't need to have 4.8 max Opus running all the time for particular questions and or tasks in software engineering, same in data science, same in product. Maybe another model will do, maybe a Haiku will do, maybe a Sonnet will do, a ChatGPT older model, or in that case, again, all these open source. I think that's the problem. A lot of companies, again, according to this report, are looking into model routing, model optimization, token optimization, or in short, ROAI. I think that's the probably emerging concept that we will be seeing more and more and more. And the Chinese players are just absolutely killing it in terms of their possibility to steer this a little bit better, because you can then install a cheaper model versus just, again, basically paying by the meter to Anthropic all these huge and hefty cloud bills. I think that was a bit of a March 2026, maybe April 2026 frenzy where everybody was token maxing, and I was proud of the Anthropic bill being 6 or 7 figures if you're a startup, and all the VCs were probably happy that you're token maxing. But if you can token max with an open source model from China and you get 10x for the same money, I think even the VCs will tell you that probably makes more sense. That's better money spent or better dollars spent on $1 because you get 10x more intelligence for the same price if you're willing to drop $150K per month per employee, for example. So the last topic just for today is MCPs. It's a reoccurring theme. You have a bit of an intel to share. It goes into the conundrum of the landscape. Now it's probably more harnesses, it's more loop engineering, and MCP probably doesn't go away. But what's the take on MCP? What's the update on Model Context Protocol?
The context about it is, as you mentioned, SaaS business model is heavily changing, and people don't know what to do. People who own the SaaS, famous SaaS like Salesforce, a lot of like known CRMs, don't know what to do, because if you can ask Claude about it, if you can ask Claude about your sales reports, or you can ask Claude to reach out to your clients, and you have this CRMs or this SaaS for. However, companies want to be agentic and want to be on the leading, like the frontier. They started with building like this small, shitty chatbots that you could easily just ask. They would ask basically answer to super simple questions. Then they built increasingly more complex agents within the platform. So basically to help you use the platform. And you see agents within the platform that you could use mostly for free. Again, this was built when API costs were subsidized, and it was like a very prosperous time in terms of tokens. And now we're seeing that they can't beat Anthropic in terms of capabilities. They can't offer Opus on their platform for free. They don't want to charge their clients for higher licenses because their clients are already considering dropping the license altogether. And what's left is just maintaining a competitive edge by just saying, hey, you can keep using Claude. We'll even let your Claude agent connect to our system via MCP. And so one of the things that companies are doing is building MCPs and saying, hey, you're free to connect, use our system. All your data is already here. Please don't leave. Still pay for your license, still pay for your bills. We'll just let your Claude agent or whatever your agent is connect to it. It is an option. It's certainly one that helps people that are already using Claude. It means you can connect it to more and more things. Like we said, it was always about what it can connect to and what tools and the harness it has access to, more than the model itself. You have 10 models that are more than capable of doing your day-to-day work, except for the very advanced things. And so it's a matter of, can we connect our agents and our models in a safe-ish way to most platforms that we use? And companies are building MCPs just for that. Is it working? We'll know as soon as they're done building them and see if people adopt them. But it's certainly good for the users, not sure a full profit in the long term for the SaaS companies.
I mean, it's probably a good way also to wrap up the episode. I do believe, if I can make a bit of a forecast what's going to happen, yes, either the firms, like, for example, a particular company that offers a CRM, they either offer an MCP and the client are staying and they're continuing to paying 30, 40, 50K per seat, or maybe for the org per month for the access to the software, or the company just says, you know what, I'm taking this $500,000 that I'm anyway paying to all these companies. If it's in the case of SAP, it's multiple millions, and I'm just going to rebuild the whole system with loop engineering, with agentic harnesses, with evaluations from scratch. Because something we've learned in agentic artificial intelligence is AI is the best in greenfield projects. And if you're reverse engineering and or you're starting something from zero, it is greenfield. That's where they're really, really shining. They're less shining on an existing code base that's been there for 27 years or 14 years and running on some sort of legacy stuff with a billion APIs and hardly anything is documented. That's really not the homeland of AI. But what is the homeland of AI is greenfield projects from zero. So essentially, if I were a CIO of a $10 billion budget company, what I would be doing, I would fetch probably my top people, give me a list of all the stuff that we're paying for, and make a solid assessment, or maybe add Claude Tag it. Which of these software can we rebuild and by how much? And then we probably have some sort of an idea which of these softwares we need to kick out, what we can rebuild and then maintain ourselves. And this is, of course, not for free. We've talked about it. Return AI has to be factored in. You will probably most likely do this not with Anthropic. You'll probably do it with Chinese models because, again, you get a lot more output from what you pay. So I think that's the age we are in until the year end. Let's do a quick update by the year end. But I do believe a lot of orgs are looking into their expenses. They're realizing, why are we paying 37K per month to the CRM provider if we can build our own CRM with 4 agentic engineers, a bunch of AWS costs, and a bunch of Chinese models that are getting Fable-like in September, October 2026. So that's a little bit the rundown on today's episode. Thanks again, Joao, for joining. We're heading into the 60s. More Chinese models, probably more loop engineering and more MCP stuff is to follow. Aside from maybe a financial corner, Micron is still beating the market, but everybody else is a little bit under pressure. So why don't we have a look at this next week, Joao? And with that said, happy weekend to you and to everybody in the audience. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.
See ya.